June 1944. Normandy. Dawn breaks slowly over a landscape that looks less like France and more like a scar carved into the earth by steel and fire. The air hangs heavy with the smell of wet soil, crushed grass, diesel fumes, and the faint metallic taste of cordite that refuses to fade. The bocage rises around the fields like walls of tangled vegetation. Ancient hedgerows packed with earth and stone and roots woven so tightly they might as well be fortifications. Fog clings low across the ground, thick enough to distort shapes and swallow sound. Somewhere in the distance, artillery grumbles like distant thunder, rolling and echoing across the countryside. Birds do not sing. Nothing moves without intent. Every footstep, every engine, every breath feels like the world is waiting for something to begin. A Sherman Firefly sits hidden behind a hedgerow, so dense it appears almost entombed within the earth itself. Dew glistens on its olive-green armor, trickling down the angled plates like sweat on a soldier's skin. The barrel of its long 17-pounder gun stretches outward, impossible to mistake for the shorter, stubbier weapons of regular Shermans. It looks out of place, like a spear among hammers, slender, elongated, lethal. Inside, the crew waits in silence, broken only by the hum of the engine idling low, a mechanical heartbeat steady and controlled. They are not American. They are British. And this tank, unlike any other Sherman in the field that morning, has been built for one purpose: to kill tigers. The commander, David Render, stands half out of the turret, goggles pulled tight, scanning the fog-choked fields ahead through binoculars. He is only 19 years old, but the war has aged him years beyond that number. He has survived long enough to know that survival itself is an unstable commodity. Beside him, deep in the turret, the gunner Joe Ekins wipes sweat and grime from his brow with the back of his hand, though the air is cold. His fingers tremble, not from fear but from anticipation, the way a marksman steadies himself before a shot that matters more than breath. The loader, Ken West, sits with one hand curled around a brass-cased APDS round, knuckles white. In the driver's position below, Stan Lockhart rests motionless, his eyes fixed forward. The radio operator and bow gunner, Harold Barnes, breathes slowly, counting seconds as if rationing them. They are men trained not to speak unless speech matters. They know that in this terrain surprise is everything, and noise kills. They also know something else. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, moving unseen, are 3 Tiger tanks of the German Heavy SS Battalion. Monster machines of steel and fear, wrapped in armor thick enough to shrug off nearly every Allied shell ever fired at them. Tanks that have become legend and myth. Tigers that soldiers whisper about the way children whisper about ghosts. The kind of machines that, when they appear, make the ground itself feel like it tries to pull away. The morning hangs in perfect stillness. Render lowers the binoculars slowly, the strap brushing against the frozen metal of his tanker helmet. He listens. Beyond the rustle of breeze pushing against branches, beyond the faint drone of distant aircraft somewhere above the clouds, another sound begins to rise. Deep, heavy, rhythmic. It does not sound like the smooth mechanical hum of a Sherman. It is louder, slower, more deliberate, like a hammer striking the earth with every rotation. The driver lifts his hand. The crew freezes. There again, a low metallic clatter, followed by the grinding of tracks crushing loose stones. Then the unmistakable groan of gears pushing an enormous weight. It is distant but growing. Something vast moves through the fog. Render leans forward against the hatch rim, binoculars raised once more. But the fog conceals everything. Time stretches. The sound gets louder. The hedgerow trembles. A shape forms in the mist, black steel cutting through the gray. A turret, massive and square-shouldered, emerging like a fortress rising from the sea. The long barrel of an 88mm gun points forward, steady and calm. Then the hull reveals itself, huge, angular, invincible. A tiger. The crew feels the air tighten. Breath stops. Hearts pause. No one speaks. And then another appears behind it. And another. 3 tigers moving in tight file formation, advancing confidently through terrain that should have favored the defender. But the Germans believe in their superiority. They believe no Allied tank can kill them from the front. They believe they are untouchable. They believe legends that the Tiger cannot die. The Firefly crew knows that this morning those legends will be tested. Render whispers through the throat microphone, voice barely above silence. The words cut through the intercom like a blade. Stand by to fire. Inside the turret, the world compresses into a narrow circle of focus. Ekins shifts his weight, settles into position, one eye pressed against the sight. West positions the APDS round near the breach, timing his movement. ready to slam it home the moment the order comes. Barnes steadies his breathing. Lockhart presses his heel against the clutch. The engine hum drops to a tighter drone. The Tigers move closer. The fog swirls around them, making them appear like phantoms. The earth vibrates beneath their weight. A flock of crows explodes upward from a hedgerow, startled into flight. The sun lifts higher, light filtering through haze. Render looks down into the Firefly turret. His voice is low, precise, controlled. Gun target. Tiger. 800 yards. Traverse left. The turret whirs, slow and deliberate, rotating toward the enemy shapes. Ekins adjusts elevation. The fine adjust while clicking gently. His hand steadies. The crosshair slides across the fog and locks onto the lead Tiger. Render watches the monster through his binoculars. The German commander stands half out of the turret, scanning confidently through his own optics, unaware that death watches him. He taps the loader's helmet once with the flat of his hand. Load APDS. West slams the shell into the breech. The gun locks home with a metallic thud. The sound is final, absolute. Ekins inhales once, slow and deep. Fire. The Firefly recoils, the blast ripping through the air with a shockwave that tears leaves from branches in a violent burst. The tank shudders, its suspension groaning under the force. A pillar of smoke erupts from the muzzle, spiraling upward like a signal flare. The sound rolls across the fields like thunder striking stone. 4,300 feet away, the shell reaches the Tiger in less than a second. It strikes just below the mantle of the main gun. A flash of white-hot penetration, a spark of metal, and then the armor buckles inward. A bloom of flame bursts through the turret seam like a torch pressed against wet paper. The commander's body snaps backward, thrown from the turret like a ragdoll. A column of black smoke erupts upward. Inside the Firefly, no one cheers. No one speaks. There is no celebration, only discipline. West is already reaching for another round, hands moving in automatic rhythm. Ekins resets the elevation, breath controlled, eyes narrowed. Render watches the second Tiger halt, its driver slamming the brakes, the machine shuddering in confusion. The turret swings wildly, trying to locate the attacker. The Germans did not expect artillery. They did not expect tanks. They expected Allied armor to retreat. Now they are blind. Render's voice again. Second Tiger. 900 yards. Gun ready. The turret traverses slightly. The target fills the sight. Fire. The second blast strikes like a hammer. The Firefly shakes harder this time, the recoil echoing through the hull like an earthquake. The shell cuts through the air, disappearing into the fog before reappearing in a flash of violent orange and black. The Tiger erupts. Flames burst through the turret hatches. Ammunition cooks off, bursting the turret upward in a geyser of burning steel. Shrapnel tears through branches and soil. 2 Tigers destroyed in under a minute. Silence follows, a silence more violent than sound. It is the silence of disbelief, of fear, of a legend collapsing. Inside the Firefly, the crew's breath steam against metal. Their hearts pound so loudly that they can hear each other's pulse through the intercom. Render's hand shakes slightly, not from fear but from the weight of what they are doing. He stares ahead. The third Tiger grinds to a halt. The German commander freezes. For the first time in many months, he does not know what to do. He orders the turret to rotate, but the crew inside hesitates. Hesitation becomes panic. Panic becomes paralysis. For years they have believed that nothing could kill them. Now 2 Tigers burn less than 100 meters away, flames clawing toward the sky. Render feels the weight of that moment, the moment when invincibility dies. He lowers his voice to the intercom, steady and calm. Last one, 1,000 yards. Keep your aim low. Ekins already lines up the shot. He can see nothing but the faint squared outline of the Tiger hull through the fog, but he has trained for this. The crosshair finds center. His breath slows. Everything narrows to a single point of focus. Steel, trajectory, silence. Fire. The Firefly buckles under the third blast, steel groaning as if in pain. The shell rips through fog and distance and time, and then it finds its mark, striking the lower turret ring where armor is weakest. The explosion is muted at first, a dull thud like a fist striking wood. Then the turret locks, jams, and stops moving. Smoke pours out of the hatches. A second explosion follows, internal, catastrophic. The turret jumps from the hull. Flames roar skyward, and then everything stops. The fog rolls back slowly, revealing 3 burning giants lying motionless in the field. Flames rise in twisting pillars of black smoke that blend into the morning sky. Pieces of molten steel hiss in the grass. A lone German crewman stumbles from the wreck, jacket and helmet smeared with soot, eyes wide in disbelief. He collapses to his knees. He stares at the destruction around him, unable to speak, unable to understand how 3 tigers could die in less time than it takes to prepare a meal. Inside the Firefly, Render closes his eyes for a brief moment. He hears only his breath. He feels the heat rising from the spent shell casings at his feet. He sees the glow of the burning tigers lighting the fog outside like torches in a cathedral. 12 minutes ago, 3 tigers rolled forward with certainty. Now they are wreckage. Ekins keeps his eye pressed to the site, staring at the burning carcasses through fractured glass. His hands shake. The loader sits back, exhausted, sweat freezing on his face. The radio operator removes his headset slowly, as if afraid sound might still kill him. The driver does not move. He cannot. No one speaks. There's no roar of triumph, only breath. Render finally opens his eyes. He looks again through his binoculars, not at the wreckage, but beyond it, through the fading fog. He sees nothing now but empty fields and silent hedgerows. He turns back into the turret and speaks with a voice that carries no pride, only the weight of what war demands. Reverse. Slowly, the Firefly begins to back up, tracks grinding through wet soil, pushing branches aside. They do not linger. They do not look back. Somewhere behind them, artillery begins to rumble again, rolling like distant thunder. The world resumes motion. The fog continues to lift, revealing the skeletons of 3 steel beasts that once controlled the battlefield by fear alone. Now they are only monuments to the end of a myth. And in the cold morning air, the truth settles like falling ash. Invincibility lasts only until the moment precision arrives. When the smoke drifts away and silence returns, nothing remains but wrecks and disbelief. The smoke from the burning tigers drifted upward into the slowly brightening sky, twisting into dark spirals that marked the battlefield like funeral banners. The hedgerows absorbed the sound, turning the aftermath into a suffocating silence that pressed down on everything living. The Firefly reversed until the burning hulks disappeared behind the wall of thick vegetation, and only when they were completely hidden from sight did Render allow himself to exhale, a long release of tension he had held since the first shell left the barrel. The world seemed motionless, frozen by the shock of what had just taken place. For years, the Tiger had dominated every engagement, its myth traveling faster than its tracks, its reputation paralyzing Allied tank crews before they even saw one. The Germans believed the Tiger was the embodiment of invulnerability, and many on both sides believed it was the deciding force of the war. Yet here, in less than 12 minutes, 3 of them lay destroyed, reduced to smoking steel skeletons by a single Sherman Firefly positioned in the right place at the right time with the right weapon and the right intentions. In headquarters across the front, the news traveled rapidly, coded through radio networks in fragments. 3 Tigers eliminated by Firefly. Single engagement. 0 friendly casualties. Officers did not believe it at first. They demanded confirmation, demanded coordinates, demanded names. Analysts rechecked range calculations, questioning the possibility of kills beyond what doctrine considered reasonable. Strategists debated whether radar-assisted sighting or sheer luck was responsible. But the crews on the ground understood something deeper, something that could not fit into reports or calculations. The myth of the Tiger had cracked, and when myths crack, they do not fracture gradually. They collapse all at once. In German command 10 miles away, disbelief spread like a contagion. The SS battalion expected to break Allied lines with these armored titans, expected to force retreat simply by appearing, but instead their spearhead had vanished. Survivors spoke in broken sentences, trembling, unable to reconcile what they had seen. One officer stared into empty space, whispering that he watched the lead Tiger burn from a single pinpoint flash in the fog, convinced it must have been an airstrike, unable to accept that artillery alone could not be so precise, and weather that scattered everything. Others refused to believe the shells came from a tank at all. They searched the sky for aircraft, scoured the reports for mention of naval gunfire, and demanded to know where the invisible enemy was hiding. But there was nothing in the sky, nothing on the cliffs, nothing but a single Firefly already gone. Rumors spread through the ranks, rumors that the Allies had deployed a secret weapon capable of killing tanks from beyond visual range, rumors that the Americans or British had developed a gun that could slice through steel as if it were paper, rumors that the battlefield had changed overnight into something unrecognizable. Fear does not need truth. It only needs uncertainty, and uncertainty crept like smoke into every corner of the German command. Men who once fought with clarity and conviction now hesitated, second-guessed, hesitated again. That hesitation would cost time, and time would cost ground, and ground would cost victory. Meanwhile, the Firefly moved deeper into the bocage, using the narrow lanes and hedgerow tunnels like a ghost following its own trail. Render leaned against the turret rim, feeling the wind cut across his face, cold enough to sting, real enough to remind him that he was still alive. The battle had ended, but the weight of its consequences hung on his shoulders. He looked down at Ekins, who still stared through the gun sight, eyes wide, breathing uneven. The shock of perfection clung to him, the understanding that he had done something almost impossible, that he had eliminated 3 of the most feared machines in the war with 3 shots in succession, each lethal, each timed, each pure execution. There was no excitement in his expression, only disbelief. War had a strange way of turning achievement into burden. West wiped the last trace of shaking from his hands, trying to steady himself, but adrenaline burned through his veins like acid. Lockhart drove on without speaking, eyes fixed ahead like a man navigating the edge of reality. Barnes listened to the static on the radio, his mind searching for something familiar, something ordinary to cling to. But ordinary things no longer seemed to exist. They had changed the battlefield, and the battlefield had changed them. The command network began to adjust strategies. Allied armor advanced with new momentum, emboldened by reports of Tigers burning. Infantry units, once paralyzed by the fear of encountering German armored monsters, now pushed harder, dug faster, fought with the belief that the impossible had been proven possible. The Firefly crews across the front understood now what they truly carried. Not just a weapon, but a counterweight against terror. The 17-pounder had always been capable, at least on paper. But war is not resolved on paper. War is resolved by belief, by fear, by perception. If soldiers believe they cannot win, they have already lost. If they believe they can, the battlefield transforms. In military doctrine, there's no formula for morale, no equation for courage, no unit of measurement for the moment when a myth dies. And that morning, a myth did die, burning in orange flames against gray fog, sending a message that thundered silently across the Western Front. The Tigers were more than machines. They were symbols of German military supremacy, embodiments of the idea that technology and armor could protect a nation from defeat. Their destruction forced German commanders to reconsider everything: tactics, deployment, defensive posture. If Tigers could die this quickly, nothing was safe. No formation was secure. No attack was inevitable. The psychological damage was greater than the mechanical loss. Confidence cracked. Eyes darted to hedgerows, not with arrogance, but with suspicion. Every whisper of engine noise triggered alertness. Every fog bank became an ambush. The battlefield had shifted from visible power to invisible threat. This was a turning point made not of grand speeches or banners or declarations, but of silence, smoke, and disbelief. In the sky above, a pair of Allied reconnaissance aircraft began circling, photographing the smoking wrecks. The images, developed hours later, were pinned to briefing boards in headquarters and studied with reverence normally reserved for victory monuments. 3 Tigers immobilized in a single engagement. The photographs traveled quickly, to generals planning armored thrusts, to analysts calculating casualty projections, to intelligence officers charting enemy strength. They were shared to infantry platoons as proof, handed to young tank crews to show that survival was possible, and even shipped back to London, where they landed on the desks of ministers who understood the power of narrative in a war fought not only with steel and fuel, but with morale and conviction. Render, stepping down from the turret for the first time since the engagement, stretched his stiff back and felt the tremor in his hands. He looked at the Firefly, at the long barrel still faintly warm, at the streaks of soot clinging to the armor where muzzle blast and exhaust had blackened the paint, and he realized how thin the line between survival and annihilation could be. A single miscalculation, a single misplaced shell, a single second slower, and the Firefly would have been just another smoking ruin beside the Tigers. War did not reward heroics. War rewarded preparation, precision, and timing. The crew did not discuss the kill count. They did not talk about achievement. They talked only about fuel levels, ammunition remaining, movement routes, and radio frequencies. Professionalism did not allow celebration, only continuation. Far to the east, German radio transmissions crackled with confusion and fragments of disbelief. Words like Panzervernichtet repeated with static interference, officers demanding clarification, men arguing with one another across the airwaves. Some insisted sabotage must have occurred. Others stated that new Allied anti-tank aircraft had struck from above. No one was willing to say the truth, that a single tank had done it, a single British crew, a single Firefly, The moment they accepted that truth, the psychological foundation of the Tiger's dominance would collapse forever. And yet that collapse had already begun, whether they admitted it or not. In war, moments arrive that divide time into before and after. Before the Firefly engagement, the Tiger was considered unstoppable. After the Firefly engagement, it was merely a tank. Powerful, yes, but mortal, vulnerable, breakable. The legend fractured, and the fracture spread like cracks in ice across a frozen lake. German armored units that once advanced aggressively now hesitated, scanning fields with heightened caution. Allied units that previously avoided engagement now pressed forward, knowing that fear no longer owned them. This shift, invisible in maps and orders, was colossal, reshaping momentum at a fundamental level. That night, as Render's crew settled into a makeshift rest position behind a ruined farmhouse, the field around them was quiet except for the distant rumbling of artillery and the restless movement of trucks carrying ammunition and fuel forward. The men sat in silence on the ground beside their tank. No lanterns, no fire, only moonlight glinting off steel and the sound of engines echoing like ghosts across the plains. Ekins leaned against the track, staring at the dirt. He still felt the recoil in his bones, still heard the blast in his ears, still saw the flashes through the fog. He did not feel victorious. He felt heavy, drained, overwhelmed by the weight of what he had done. Render placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, said nothing, and walked away. Words were unnecessary. They all understood. No medals had been awarded. No speeches had been made. No commanders had congratulated them. Yet their actions had shifted strategy, altered doctrine, reshaped an army's belief. This was war stripped to its core, not glory, not triumph, but precision, discipline, and survival. As the night deepened, fog drifting once more across the fields like ghostly shrouds, Render looked out at the quiet countryside and understood that the world had changed, though no one would fully realize it until months later, when the collapse of German armored dominance became unmistakable, when the offensive power of the Tiger became defensive regret, when the war accelerated toward conclusion. For now, the battlefield slept. But beneath that sleep, something profound had taken root. The understanding that machines built to inspire fear could themselves be feared, that invincibility was a story, not a fact, that even the mightiest armor could be punctured by a single well-placed round. The bocage stood silent again, as if nature wanted to reclaim the ground stained by steel and fire, but the silence carried a truth louder than any explosion. The age of the Tiger had ended, not with a roar, but with 3 shots. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Firefly spread across the front like a quiet shockwave, carried not by official reports, but by whispers exchanged in trenches, mess halls, and convoys rolling through mud-soaked villages. Tank crews spoke of it when cleaning their barrels. Infantry spoke of it while repairing boots near field stoves, and officers mentioned it in low tones, as if afraid that saying it too loudly would break the fragile power it held. In the Allied lines, the effect was immediate and visible. Soldiers who once froze at the rumor of tigers now tightened their grips on their weapons and stepped forward with a steadiness that had seemed impossible only days earlier. Battles were no longer approached with dread, but with calculated confidence. The name Firefly became more than a designation. It became a symbol of the moment when fear changed sides. Meanwhile, German intelligence officers tried desperately to contain the spread of the incident, issuing directives to suppress reports of tank losses, forbidding discussion of vulnerability to long-range Firefly engagement, and presenting the event as an anomaly caused by weather rather than capability. But the truth couldn't be contained, because the survivors themselves had seen something they could not unsee. Men who watched 3 tigers erupt into flame from invisible fire no longer trusted steel walls to protect them. They scanned horizons with haunted eyes, waiting for death to come from distances logic once declared impossible. They were experiencing a new phenomenon, psychological collapse without a decisive battle. The war was already shifting in favor of the Allies, even if maps did not yet show the change. Strategists recognized the shift quickly. In planning rooms far from the front, chalkboards filled with diagrams of new push strategies and revised armor formations. The doctrine that had guided armored warfare since the beginning of the conflict began to dissolve. Tanks no longer sought close engagement. They sought angles, concealment, elevation, and surprise. Lines of attack twisted into shapes no textbook had taught, all driven by the knowledge that range was now king and that visibility did not equal safety. Reports circulated analyzing how the 17-pounder gun, long considered too specialized, now represented the future of armored warfare. Ammunition shipments doubled. Factories increased machining of barrels and reinforced breech assemblies. Crews were reassigned to new Firefly-equipped units. Manuals were rewritten overnight. The battlefield was being re-engineered in real time. The British command, once cautious about committing Fireflies widely, now accelerated deployment as fast as transport ships and railway lines could handle. They understood what the German high command feared. When a weapon rewrites belief, the war itself changes. The effects rippled beyond immediate tactics. In Berlin, high-ranking officers met repeatedly to analyze reports that contradicted their expectations. Some argued that the Soviet front demanded reinforcement and that Western tanks posed no threat. Others pointed to burned Tigers and shaken survivors as evidence that the Allies now held an advantage too dangerous to ignore. Heated debates erupted in rooms thick with smoke and exhaustion. The Tiger, once hailed as the backbone of armor dominance, was suddenly accused of being too heavy, too slow, too complex, too blind. For years its strength had been mythic, but now its weaknesses were undeniable. Engineers proposed urgent modifications, reinforcing armor, improving optics, designing new ammunition, even accelerating prototypes of super-heavy tanks that existed only on paper. But paper could not fight battles. Time was gone. Resources were gone. The industrial engine that once terrified the world was breaking down, and the Firefly engagement exposed that fracture like a fault line visible from the sky. And beneath the technical panic ran a deeper crisis, the collapse of belief. When soldiers stop believing their weapons will protect them, when commanders start questioning whether victories are possible, when fear replaces confidence, defeat begins long before it is visible. Across the Western Front, units that had once stalled now surged forward. The Allied advance pressed mile by mile, pushing toward the Rhine with a momentum that felt unstoppable. Shermans rolled in coordinated columns, Fireflies interspersed among them like hidden daggers, invisible until needed. Infantry marched behind, stepping through frozen mud with the knowledge that they now moved with the weight of inevitability. Air superiority hammered German defenses from above, artillery shook the earth from behind, and armored thrusts split defensive lines like steel wedges. Yet through all the thunder of advancing war, the memory of that single morning remained sharp and alive in those who had witnessed it. Render's crew continued fighting, moving from town to field to hilltop, rarely staying still more than a night. They destroyed more armor, supported more advances, survived more engagements, but none left the same imprint on their souls as the battle against the three Tigers. Every time Ekins looked through the sights, he felt that moment return, not pride, not triumph, but a heavy responsibility. Precision was not glory, it was burden. With every shot, he carried the weight of lives saved and taken, and that weight grew heavier as victory drew nearer, because victory itself offered no relief. One night, after a brutal week of advancing through terrain shredded by artillery, the crew stopped near a ruined barn whose roof had collapsed under months of shelling. Render sat alone beside the tracks, staring into darkness and listening to engines idling in the distance. West cleaned mud from his boots with silent, methodical strokes. Lockhart slept slumped against a wall with his jacket pulled over his face. Barnes leaned against a crate, writing a letter he would never finish, pausing every few lines as if language itself resisted him. War had scoured them clean of everything except purpose. They were tools now, precise, disciplined, necessary. But beneath the surface of steel discipline grew a quiet realization. When the war ended, they would not simply return to who they once were. Something would remain behind on every battlefield they crossed, and something else, something unspoken, would follow them home forever. At dawn the sky turned pale silver, and frost glimmered like shattered glass on the wreckage around them. Orders arrived to move again, pushing deeper into territory where German defenses were collapsing. They climbed into the Firefly without speaking, and the engine roared to life with familiar vibrations that shuddered through their bones. The treads bit into the frozen ground, carrying them forward to whatever waited beyond the next hill, the next hedgerow, the next ruined town. As they rolled out, Render looked back once at the barn and felt a single thought crystallize, the truth that had followed them since the morning they killed the Tigers. War did not reward strength, nor courage, nor technology alone. War rewarded the ones who refused to stop. Months later, after the German surrender and the guns finally fell silent, the Firefly was returned to England for refitting and storage. Render, Ekins, West, Lockhart, and Barnes were discharged separately, scattered back into the world like fragments of a shattered machine. Reporters searched for heroes to celebrate, eager to find faces to attach to victory, but the crew avoided attention, deflecting questions, refusing interviews. When asked about the Tigers, they shrugged and said the same phrase every time: "We did our job." Those words, simple and unremarkable on the surface, concealed a universe of memory too heavy to unpack. The world around them celebrated triumph with parades and flags and orchestras. But in their minds, the war continued in echoes. The roar of the 17-pounder, the trembling recoil, the flash through fog, the burning silhouettes of tanks that once felt immortal. They carried those echoes in their silence. History, however, does not permit silence forever. Analysts eventually wrote reports. Books emerged, documentaries followed. Historians traced details, reconstructed maps, timed the engagement second by second, diagrammed trajectories and armor thickness and penetration angles. They framed the event as strategy, engineering, precision. They celebrated the kill ratio, the tactical significance, the psychological transformation. But they could never recapture what the men themselves felt in those 12 minutes, the shattering collision between myth and reality, between fear and discipline, between death expected and life delivered. They could never translate the moment the battlefield changed. Only those who were there understood. Today, the field where it happened lies quiet beneath soft grass and shifting wind. No tanks remain. No smoke stains the sky. Only a shallow depression in the earth marks where a tiger once stood, now filled with rainwater that reflects the sky like a mirror. Hikers walk past unaware. Birds nest in hedgerows that once hid steel monsters. Children play in fields where men died without ever being seen. Time erases scars, but memory lingers. And sometimes, when wind moves across the landscape just right, the silence carries something deeper than sound. The echo of steel, the whisper of turning tides, the ghost of a moment when the belief in invincibility died. 3 tigers burned in 12 minutes. 1 Firefly changed the war. And the world learned a truth carved into the steel of history. Legends fall, machines break, myths shatter, but precision endures. Because sometimes the fate of armies and the turning of wars rests not on numbers or size or power, but on a single shot placed exactly where it must go. Not luck, not miracle. Precision, discipline, will, and the refusal to stop.